Hello and welcome back to Season 2 of More Than a Lumpy Jumper. And Happy New Year! It's that time where some of us make those dreaded resolutions. You know, the ones that last a week and make you feel like a failure. So Bobby and I have an alternative suggestion for approaches to making changes. Come and join us for Being a Commitment in 2024. Hi and welcome to More Than a Lumpy Jumper with Bobby and Bridge. Happy New Year! It's time for New Year's resolutions, right, Bobby?
Yeah, whatever.
Not a fan?
No, not really. I think they can be a bit vague and they're not properly planned. I mean, how many years have I said, I won't drink so much, or I'll stop drinking, or I'll lose weight, or I'll go to the gym more, all of which is utter tosh. So I've given up making New Year resolutions. I do other things, which I can tell you about during this chat. But New Year's resolutions, I say no.
Okay. There's a statistic somewhere, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but along the lines of that generally New Year's resolutions last for about 10 days or 16 days or something like that. There's something very specific, the number of days that they last for. And I guess I agree, the number of New Year's resolutions that I've started and failed to implement for more than a week can be in the hundreds, I suspect, over the number of years that I've lived. So you talked about planning and implementing. What's your preference then?
So I say don't make resolutions, make commitments. Because my sense of the word commitment, and people might think I'm splitting hairs here, I'm really not trying to. I think for me, when you use the word commitment, and I often use this when I'm coaching people, is that it involves a personal promise. You're committing to something, whatever that might be. And it also involves your own integrity. So you look in the mirror, and if you committed to do something, did you do it or didn't you? And I also think that it doesn't necessarily need to be as vague as the way that I perceive New Year resolutions. Because what you can commit to is short-term goals rather than lofty resolutions. So you can make a commitment just for the day or for a week, and then you keep doing it. So today I commit to drinking 3 glasses of water. So you commit to drinking 3 glasses of water and you drink those 3 glasses of water. And then you may well attempt to do it the following day. I think the thing is as well is that you could build it. And I think the other thing with a commitment, the other thing that I would say is that don't beat yourself up about it, because I think that this is what happens when you talk about that 10, 16 days. People will have said that they're losing weight, and then, come day 10 or day 16, whatever the stats say, they eat a bar of chocolate and they go, oh, well, fuck it. I might as well give up.
Yeah.
Whereas with a commitment, you just go, okay, day 10, I didn't do it. I'll get back on the horse tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so you don't beat yourself up. You don't just sort of like stop doing it. And, it could go for days on end. It might last all the way to day 16 and then you try again. But I think with a commitment, you can recommit. Whereas I think when somebody says it's a New Year resolution, the moment it goes wrong, it's off the table. Never to return.
Yes, never to return. I think there's an element, isn't there, of if we link it into sort of leadership business models, there's an element of smart to it, isn't there?
Absolutely.
The specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-based. And actually doing it for the day, saying today my commitment is, whether or not that's the same commitment you have for 365 days of the year, but it's only for the day. It's a bite-sized thing that you can do, which seems an awful lot easier than going, I'm going to drink 8 glasses of water every day until I die, or I'm going to lose 25 kilos in this amount of time. Because once it becomes long, it's not real once it sort of goes beyond a couple of days. Certainly for me.
No, for sure. And I think that doesn't take any account of, in the way that I feel a commitment can, is that what's happening in that moment, on that day, the situation, because situations change. So it gives you the opportunity to go, okay, fine. So today I was in a desert and couldn't get hold of 8 glasses of water. I've been slightly facetious now for effect, but I couldn't get hold of 8 glasses of water. Oh my God, it's all over. I'm never going to try doing it again. And of course, then the next day you get out of the desert and you've got access to water, so you could do it again. So you recommit.
Yeah.
And I think that's what, when I'm coaching clients, their commitments are about the practices that they can take up. And I'm always really clear with them that I don't want to give them something lofty that isn't achievable. It's got to be something that they feel that they can embed into life, into their work routine, into their life routine, whatever it might be. And then the trick is to not beat yourself up when you miss a day or you don't quite get to the practice, because then you start again. So you were saying about in leadership, I think the same does apply, that some days we don't get it right. Sometimes we make a mistake. It's not over. You can recommit and reestablish as to how that's going to work again at a different point in time.
Yeah, I really like that, because I think one of the big issues with New Year's resolutions is there's quite a lot of beating yourself up about it. And that's why a lot of people just don't even bother, because they feel that it's just going to make themselves feel bad. But with that way, this sort of bite-sized chunks, I'm doing a really cool diploma in creative leadership at UCD. And yesterday, at the end of our leadership module, we were asked to identify something that we wanted to work on and make a promise to ourselves, and then identify the smallest step. It was like, what's the very smallest thing that you need to do to move this forward, so that it was bite-sized, whether it was sending an email, having a conversation. It wasn't, I'm going to do another course on, or I'm going to become an expert in, or whatever it was. And I loved that, this idea. And so everyone, of course, was completely able to come up with the smallest step, this next little thing that they have to do to be able to move it forward. But also the point the facilitator was making to us was, which I thought was quite powerful, was actually it's the smallest step that's often the most difficult one to identify. You'll go, oh yeah, I'm going to do that.
The first step. Absolutely.
But the smallest step is actually a commitment.
It is. Absolutely. And I think that when you can get into some level of habit where you keep doing it, not beating yourself up on the days that you don't, you build confidence. And if we're talking, although I don't like the word, as we are aware, but you build competence. So I think from a leadership perspective, self-leadership, there are those commitments, but the more that you do them, you first regulate, because it's like, I've committed to this, and oh, look, I'm now in a practice. I've managed to do it 5 days on the bounce, or whatever it might be. And then eventually it becomes habit. So then that's self-generating. You're not having to think about doing it. It's almost like a commitment that's become part of you.
Yeah.
That sounds a bit woo-woo, but when I work with people, I have them say, I am a commitment to, rather than I commit to, because that gives the sense of you being the commitment. You're committing to self. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm interested in how you've linked that into leadership again, because one of the other things that I think is, I guess, important in terms of planning and in terms of deciding what your commitments are, you need to have a level of self-awareness. And I think one of the things in the discussions I've been having recently with other colleagues about leadership is that leadership starts, or a big part of leadership is self-leadership. And you've talked about regulation, self-regulation, but being aware of what it is that maybe you need to commit to or want to commit to requires a level of self-awareness. And one of the things that, when I've been looking at sort of being self-aware, and I say painfully self-aware, because sometimes it can not be, it's not comfortable to sort of do that level of sort of analysis of yourself. And you can end up doing this we get back to beating ourselves up again. And I don't like the beating ourselves up. I think it's not helpful.
No.
So I tend to work with strengths. And A really interesting exercise that a coach that I was working with a while ago gave me was, and it was a group coaching session, was to write down 50 of your strengths.
Absolutely.
And the immediate reaction of people was, oh, God, no, I don't know I can do that. That's going to be, I can maybe write 3, but 50. And she said, go away. She gave us, it was homework. So we had a couple of days to do it. And she said, but I want you to do 50. And actually, once you started to take some time to really think, you could come, everybody's got loads of strengths. We don't just have 1 or 2. And it was really empowering to kind of go, yeah, actually, yeah, I am good at that. And that I'm good at too. And it was a real change from thinking about all of the things that you're bad at.
Yeah.
And so for me, often I like to say, I'm going to keep doing these things that I'm good at, or I'm going to build on my strengths rather than try and get better at things that I'm not so good at, which can sometimes be a self-fulfilling sort of down the drain thing. So yeah, I'm a big fan of 50 strengths and working on strengths.
I agree. And I guess the only thing that I would riff off that is to say, I, as a coach, would probably turn it into an endless list of strengths. Because in different phases of life or in different situations, you might find a strength that you have failed to see in work, but you do it outside of work. And so the integration bit is to keep it going, because it may well be that something then crops up or you do something entirely different and you find a new strength. And I think that the other thing that I would say is that what that exercise has us do, which I think many of us don't with the way and speed with which we live life, is give ourselves periods of reflection. So again, if we take it all the way, I'm trying to sort of like make the analogy between this flipping New Year resolution thing and then what happens in leadership. But if you think about what people often say when they're making New Year's resolutions, is that they will reflect on the year that they've just had. I think that's a really cool thing to do. Definitely. I know that we're recording this ahead of January, but I am in a period of reflection because I've had a year as an independent and what has been achieved. So I probably need to do my list of strengths to identify what I've done and how I've done it and what I've found out about myself now that I'm not working in the corporate world anymore. So that period of reflection builds awareness because you're allowing yourself time. It's like when anything happens, the days when your commitment doesn't work out, giving yourself the period of reflection to, well, why didn't it work out? What was the situation? Who was I with? What have I learned that I'll try differently from next time? But building those periods of reflection in helps the awareness and helps bolster the commitment. So if you then look at leadership, so my second pet hate, we've had plenty of talk about competency-based interviewing. Here comes another one, drum roll please, appraisals, annual fucking appraisals. So let's just store it all up for the end of a year with no conversation in between times. Whereas what, as a leader, I feel that we should be committing to is that there are things that you check in every day with. There are things that you look at for the week. There are things that you look at for the month. There are things you look at for the quarter. So you are always planning for there to be progress. And again, that allows commitments to actually get substantiated. If your appraisal, your annual appraisal, is a bit like that ethereal New Year resolution.
Yeah.
Because people forget about it if it's not tracked all the way through. Now, there'll be some brilliant leaders actually listening to this, and I'm potentially teaching them to suck eggs. But for anyone out there who isn't working out what sort of conversations to have on a daily basis with teams, the week, the month, etc., I would plead with all of them to do that, because that's what builds the best commitments for both teams and organisations, and for yourself as a leader. Here endeth the lesson.
I totally agree with that one. It's one of my bugbears too. So we can have the odd continued rant about that throughout the year. But giving feedback, and I use that in the loosest sense of the word when we're talking about annual appraisals, because we all know feedback should be delivered as soon as possible after the event. And so, as you say, saving it all up and sort of talking in these vague ways, or saying that time when you did something 11 months ago, it's just pointless. and it's frustrating for people and it's demeaning, all of those things. I do find it demeaning. I think that if a leader can't take the time to genuinely say this didn't work or this had this impact, and going through the feedback coin or aim or act or all of the acronyms that you can use for giving appropriate feedback. If you can't be asked to do that at the time, then don't bring it up 11 months later because it's completely irrelevant.
Here's the thing as well. You talked about building your self-awareness. I use the term self-regulating, self-generating. Now, not all of us know how to do that well for ourselves. Leaders need to be giving feedback constantly to teams and team members to allow them to think about what they're then going to commit to. So if something is going awry, where has been the opportunity to commit to doing something different if you aren't told until the end of the year? I think that's the way to think about it. So feedback is a gift. Now, chances are some people will go, well, I ain't changing anything. Other people will go, okay, I need to hear that. What am I going to do differently? That's a commitment.
Yeah.
And then they're going to keep doing that if the leader keeps checking in with them to then be showing them what their commitment has done to render a change.
I think the other thing, though, is as a leader, if you're looking for doing your reflection, your self-reflection, getting ready to work out what your commitments need to be or you want them to be, leaders also should be asking for feedback from the people that they work with, from their colleagues, from their superiors.
To formulate their own commitments. Yeah.
One of the big issues, and we may already have touched on it a little bit when we talked about honest conversations. I think it was in our first episode on communication, that a lot of people have this real fear and horror of feedback, getting feedback and giving feedback, because people feel, it's uncomfortable sometimes to be told that you are not doing things as well as maybe you imagined that you were. But in reality, my experience, I think you generally know that you're not doing it well. And so getting feedback is helpful, albeit uncomfortable. But the more that we practice, and I like this idea of, all these things, they don't come naturally to many people. They're not necessarily comfortable, but the more we practice them, the better we are at it. To have a culture where feedback is just normal and is sought and given at all levels, regardless of hierarchy. And I know that again, we're supposed to be talking about leadership for humans, really. It is an aspiration, but there are places where it does become a norm, and it's incredibly helpful because then it removes this sort of, I got told that I didn't do this very well at the end of my appraisal. Whereas every day people are being told, hey, that went really, really well. This could have been done maybe slightly differently.
It doesn't get things blown out of proportion.
Yeah.
It can keep things to the size that they need to be, because it's not a throwaway comment, but it could be, next time you send me X, could you, formulate it like this? Doesn't need to be a big thing. Rather than a whole year of somebody being asked off that the way they've been sent information or whatever it been, it isn't the way that they've actually wanted it done. I mean, that might not be the best example, but it becomes something it doesn't need to be. I mean, if you think about an occasion where you haven't given feedback, and what happens in that relationship as a result of that.
And then when you try and give it later, because you bottle out.
Yeah, and then try to give it later, but then I'm not quite sure quite what happens. I'm thinking about for myself, or maybe trying to sort of like macro it out as to what happens for people. But with actually holding that in, we've used the word toxic. It becomes a little bit poisonous because it erodes. So chances are that there's some level of explosion. It's not said in any form of kind way. Your resentment and frustration is not necessarily at the person. If you looked inward, it could be your level of frustration at yourself for not having said it, but you decide to land it on the other person. There's all of those sort of things going on.
Yeah.
Whereas actually giving that feedback to allow for commitments to be created, they're proper building blocks. So whether it's for a New Year resolution or meeting your objectives or sorting your performance, when we put it back into leadership context, it's the little things. I've got another acronym for you. You might like this one.
Go for it.
Came across this from somebody called Dr. Mitchell Brown, and it's BSQ. So it's the B is for think big, the S is for act small, the Q is move quick. So that whole thing about daily commitment, commit, do it, thank you very much, and then repeat. BSQ, think big, act small.
Oh, I like that.
Move quick. It's the little things.
Okay, I like that one. And talking about not acting, I think that that's really been something I'm working with at the moment. We've already discussed I'm a great lover of the woo-woo. You're a great lover of the woo-woo. We both love the woo-woo. And I've been doing sort of lunar woo-woo. So full moon and full moon and new moon rituals. And, effectively, I don't know if you've ever done one, but the new moon is supposed to be the time where you make your commitments or make your intentions, and you go outside under the new moon with a new candle, burning new candles, some incense, whatever. You write down what you're committing to for the period of until the next new moon, or until the full moon, or you, depending on the sort of solstices, you can make it for the whole season, whatever. You write down the thing and then you burn it to sort of sacrifice it to the moon. And then the full moon ritual is very similar, except you're writing down what you want to let go of and asking for space for the things that you want to make space for. So it was full moon a few days ago, about a week ago, and I was out with my candle and my incense and my piece of paper, and came back in after finishing.
It's a bit cold being naked at this time of year.
Yeah, well, because the other element of a full moon is often that you get into water, you bathe, and you may or may not be naked. But I was fully clothed, came back in, and Mohammed, my husband, had just come back from the work, and he sort of raised an eyebrow and he goes, "Oh God, have you been doing witchcraft again?" And I sort of smiled at him, and he sort of wanders off muttering, he's like, "Bloody married a witch." And I then said to him, because we live very close to the River Lee, I said, "Well, you're bloody lucky that I'm not scampering down the steps naked and swimming in the Lee." At which point he just went away shuddering at the whole concept of that.
You must be a witch because you didn't drown.
Yeah, that's true. Well, no, I think I'm a witch if I float, so I am a witch.
Yeah.
Anyway. But I do these things and this ritual, and it's all like, yeah, look at me, I'm doing my intentions. And of course, completely forget about them, don't do them, nothing happens. And I think that that's the big issue about it being a bit, there's a word for it now, I can't remember. I think there's an element of it being a bit self-soothing for me at the moment.
Yeah.
But it's performance rather than actually doing anything. So I quite like this idea of being a little bit more realistic and committing rather than just sort of flouncing around with a candle and some incense and the new moon.
I think there's a distinction as well, though, between commitment and intention. I think there's a difference. So where we said resolution, vague, not properly planned, an intention for me is a bit more fluid, a bit more abstract.
Yeah.
And I think that definitely changes and can be set at any time. I like the fact of, like, with using the moon cycle or the season cycle, again, that's a bit like your quarterly reviews,
Yes.
But it is a case of, what level of transformation or change has gone on in that season, in that cycle. What am I taking forward? What am I letting go of for the next one?
Yeah.
So woo-woo candle wafting is absolutely fine, but it's what you actually then do as a result.
Yeah.
And then we're back to the intentional taking the moment to work with the moon cycle creates commitments. And it's those that you then need to make sure that you're thinking big, but you're keeping small, and you're doing it from the day after.
Yeah.
So they're practical.
I also think that this is a time, I mean, much as we've been mocking a little bit the idea of New Year, and this is the time, it is a time where often people do a bit of end of year or beginning of year reflection. It's also not limited to individuals. I do think that for leaders, this is an opportunity. And again, as we've said, it doesn't have to just be the new year. We do it not on an annual basis, but sort of maybe a seasonal basis, a monthly basis. But it's a good place to start, is for the team to have some self-reflection. What went well? What do we need to keep doing? What do we want to let go of? What do we want to amend slightly or change a little bit? And what are our team commitments for the next month, for this project, or for this week? I was doing a little bit of looking at this idea of sort of business self-reflection, and I've got an HBR article called "Don't Underestimate the Power of Self-Reflection" by Bailey and Riemann, and I'll put the link on along with all the other stuff that we've talked about. Again, they refer to the fact it's important for it to be a practice, but also they did a whole load of sort of terribly clever sociological research to work out what should you be reflecting on. And they came up with 3 things that are helpful to guide your self-reflection. One of them is what it is, the things that surprised you. So if there's an incident or a year or a whatever the period you're reflecting on, what are the things that have surprised you? Where often it's where people have been shocked that somebody has behaved in a particular way that's out of their norm, or over something that seemed minor, or they've been surprised by the outcome of something where they'd made an assumption that it was going to go well. And so wrongful assumptions, lapses in judgments, mistakes, all of those things are good to reflect on as to why, what was it about that made me make the wrong assumption? What should I do differently? The second one was failure. So where things have failed, where you messed up. And again, this isn't about blaming or any of those things. It's what do I learn from this? Mm-hmm. What were the things that happened that contributed to it from me? And the other one is what frustrates you. So where you found you are frustrated, what's driving that? Because your frustrations are driven by your goals and your values. Things you're frustrated with are where you can't get to where you're hoping to be or thinking that you should be. And they also recommend journaling. And I know that was one of the gifts. Well, the gratitude journal was one of your gifts over Christmas. But I think that there's also journaling as well as the gratitudes is a really, really good practice as far as I'm concerned to help you with your reflection and reading it again and then reflecting on what you read.
Yes. So again, another practice I give to coaching clients, which is a self-reflection journal. But if you're committing to doing something different, the reflections are usually about how you've kept old habits that you're trying to get lost or loose from, how they keep showing up. So very similar to what surprised you, the failures, the frustrations. It's very much about what's keeping you in the same patterns that you're trying to commit to not having anymore. And then you can keep spotting the situations where it keeps showing back up again. The places that it's stopping you creating your new habits. So it's similar to what you're saying, but I'm with you. I think that the self-reflection is so important from a learning perspective. And I really like your point about it's not just about us doing that as individuals, but doing that as groups, doing that as teams. The leaders will learn a lot from that as well.
Yeah, because I normally there's quite a lot of feedback in that as well in terms of your leadership style, or particularly I think one of the big issues, it was the first episode we talked about was communication. And so while I am a great fan of not beating yourself up and when you're looking at where you need to go is to focus on strengths. But I do think that if you identify that communication is problematic for you, or that there are some nobody's bad at communication across the board, but if there are elements of communication that you know that you could do better or need to do better or are contributing to frustrations, etc., certainly those are ones that I'm when I look at myself, active listening, practicing honest conversations, because those are the ones that I know I have difficulty with, but I know I'm not the only person out there, are ones that might be worth saying, okay, I'm going to work with my strengths to improve or to strengthen this element that maybe I'm not quite as strong as I could be.
Yeah. I think that the saying them out loud or saying them to other people brings you to hold them to account more. So the things that you've just brought up that you want to commit to doing more of, you have now just said to however many listeners we will have on this episode.
Accountability buddies.
And made them nicely public. So they this becomes our place of accountability.
Damn it.
Ha ha! Notice that I kept very quiet. No, I don't think so. I heard absolute commitments there. So you start with it now. The other thing that I was going to say that's just popped into my mind when you talk about frustrations and periods of reflection, I always used to think in the first instance, the post-exercise reports and all of that jazz that we had to do in the military. I also remember chuckling quite a lot about practical exercises not involving soldiers. I'll leave people to work out what the acronym for that is. I'm so childish. Bobby. I really am such a child. I'm giggling about it now because it always makes me laugh. Anyway, PXRs, post-exercise reports.
Yeah.
They are periods of reflection. What have we learned? And walking into the corporate world after my time in the army, and how often I found myself in situations where the same mistakes were being made over and over again because there was never any form of evaluation or stopping to review during. And people just kept going, I'm just going to do, we've always done it like this. Oh, God.
Another of your favourite phrases, Bobby.
Another of my favourite phrases. I mean, again, in my more petulant times, it's like, oh, well, this is the way you've always done it. I'm going to deliberately do it differently. Was very unhelpful, probably on some occasions, helpful on others. But those that you're banging your head against a brick wall. Then nothing will change if those habits don't change. So it happens individually, it happens in teams, it happens with leaders, it happens in organisations, it probably happens in the world.
Well, I'm not sure, but of course, I don't. It'd be lovely if the world did a bit of like a proper self-reflection, or governments did self-reflection. I think that I too was surprised when I moved into other organisations that there was such an aversion to having these sort of post-exercise reflections.
Yeah,
or when they were done, they were used as blame machines. And yes. So and then yes. I became very aware of why people didn't want to do them, because actually when you did do them, people just used it to blame people. Yeah,
it was a witch hunt. Yeah. It was a witch hunt. You'd have been caught all the time.
Rude. Yeah, I think when I tried to have them and said, look, I want to have these reflections after we've delivered a project or after an event, I want to talk about what went well. Let's applaud people. And nobody would, because there was a lack of trust, because everyone was so used to this idea of being punished. And I was there going, I don't want this to be blame. And I just want us to do it better next time and make sure we don't make the same mistakes. And I've done a lot of security evaluations after or reflections after incidents, and when I've then said, where's the report from the last time an incident similar to this happened, I want to see whether or not my conclusions are exactly the same as the ones from the last one 5 years ago. And often they absolutely were, because they just get put in a drawer and nobody pays attention to them.
Yeah. And again, that goes back to, so I'm with you, the blame game, but equally the post-evaluation is a time to reflect and make new commitments. Not just going through the motions and then shoving it in a drawer, because it should be the start of something new or changing the way of doing something. But what's happened in your example there is that they've gone through the motions after a security incident, done the evaluation report, patted themselves on the back, and then off they go. But there's got to be the question with, well, if that's what we found out, what are we going to do to change it? What's the new action? Make it small, move quick.
Yeah, people don't like change though, do they?
They do not.
And also, it's slightly different from intention, but that period of reflection, particularly in teams or for yourself, actually, should also be a time of
celebration.
Yeah, of saying, and this was done really, really well, and hey, let's shout out to somebody who went over and above, or you did this really well, you did this really well. Let's have more of that worked brilliantly, and that then caused this to happen. But we don't, and to be fair, I don't know that when I was writing those reports on security incidents that I ever identified, sort of went out of my way to go, but let's, okay, these things didn't work so well. This needs to change. This needs to change. These are my recommendations. But there wasn't a space for, and I should have put it in. I think maybe you just get into that mindset. I regret that to go, and I'd just like to, here's a paragraph of congratulations to these people for a job really, really well done, and let's hope they keep doing it. So that's my note to self for the future.
Yeah. Note to self. Well, there you go. There's another commitment. Hope you're all listening in carefully, listeners. We've got quite a list here for Bridget, whereas I've been very careful about not making any.
What is your commitment for the new year, Bobby?
So I have a sneaking suspicion, having made that distinction between intention and commitment, that this is still an intention at the moment, that I need to think about the practical steps, the practical commitments that I'm going to make to it. But I've realised that I need to pause more in the new year. I was pausing quite well at the beginning of 2023 because there was lots of space in which to pause, because I hadn't picked up coaching clients, I hadn't picked up consultancy work, I hadn't started a podcast with one of my dearest friends. So I mean that. Don't laugh. Accept it.
Oh, I'm accepting it.
Thank
you.
With joy and gratitude.
Yes.
Or else. So anyway, I realise as the year has gone on that I've gone back a little bit into my corporate mode of, oh my God, I've got so much to do. How do I juggle all of these things? Feeling that little fire in my big belly going off when the email comes in that I could really do without, because I got a plan in place of what I was going to do today. So I need to pause more, and I'm sort of like trying to do it now, but I know that I've got to build in more practical steps of the centering that I talked about in our gifts episode, where I need to remind myself to center and be saying things like, I don't need to do that right now. Not everything has to be done right now. Whatever it might be. So being very clear with myself that the pausing will allow a moment to decide what really needs to do. So that's what I'm committing to. And I've got to bring in those practical steps of almost like when I'm cleaning my teeth in the morning, what am I committing to today?
That's nice.
Which will allow for pauses. So I think that's my biggie.
Okay, and I don't have to grab any because I've just splurged them out of my
all over
subconscious. I have to think of small steps now to do, but in a way, those are also intentions, because they're all sort of an aspirational thing to do more active listening. But I think you're right. It will have to be that each morning I will have to say, today I will listen more actively to the cat or whoever it is I get to speak to in that day. I spend more time talking to my cat than I do anyone else. I think she doesn't listen to me. I don't listen to her.
If you shape your day in the way that plans are often created at work, or in a work environment, I often talk about where you want to get to is your shoreline, and the activities that you need to do to get to that shoreline are all the waves that are coming in. So you've got the active listening. So that could be that you actually have that going on, and that you know by the end of the year you want to be an active listener. But in actual fact, let's take it to being the week or the month or whatever it might be. What are the things that you're doing? But in the shape of the day, it's the commitment in the morning. But the other commitment is to the opportunity to self-reflect on how it's gone in that day or that week or whatever feels realistic to you. Where have I really listened this week, and who to?
Yeah. I think as we've been talking, certainly much as I sort of splurged out a couple of other intentions, I'm finding a lot of benefit from when I do journaling, but I'm not doing it. It's not a practice yet. It's not a habit. I sort of do it in phases. I'm doing it at the moment because of the course that I'm studying, and we have to do self-reflection logs as part of the academic submission. And it's been I've really enjoyed sort of going back over them. And I like that reference in the HBR journal. It's not about just writing it down. It's then about looking at it again, maybe at the end of the week, and also jotting more stuff down about what you think about what you wrote. So it gets a bit meta. But yeah, I think that that's definitely my commitment, one that I feel really comfortable, and sort of we've been talking about somatics over the last few weeks, but I can feel like a little, I don't know what it is, but there's a feeling in my body that is like, yeah, I like that one. So yeah, I'm gonna commit to journaling.
I think the other thing to say to you on that, because you said earlier on in the discussion about performance, and that naked candle wafting was a bit about performance. and I would invite you not to have your journaling as performance as well. And I'll tell you for why.
Yeah.
Because I know that when I've been in periods of journaling, because I think I ought to commit to it as well, but knowing what I'm like, it's going to be done in the most beautiful notebook, and it's going to be really neat handwriting, blah, blah, blah. And of course, then I'll have a day where it becomes continuous writing as I'm letting all of the rage out of my body, which looks like some kind of maniac has been at the notebook. And then, of course, I've ruined the notebook. I'll stop journaling. So, and it also doesn't need to be done in the same notebook or at the same point in the day. And I think the reason I'm saying all of that is that I feel that both of us are growing journaling practices in different ways. So this is a bit like verbal journaling, some of it, as we're reflecting on things that we're actually saying. We're writing on LinkedIn. We're not just writing about the podcast, we're writing about things that matter to us as well.
Yeah.
And then there can be the book of reflection or of gratitude or whatever it might be. There's the note you write whilst you're at a conference or whilst you're doing your course, which is a reflection. Now, I understand that it's much easier if they're all in the same place, but you just never know when you're going to come back to your notebook again. And there it is. And you'll find it's the most...
Yeah, mine's very chaotic.
Yeah.
Mine's definitely chaotic.
But I think that's sort of fine.
I have about 5 or 6 notebooks any one time, and it's whichever one I manage to grab. I have been quite consistent. I've been really, I've got 2 that I kind of keep now. The rest I've put away so I don't grab them by accident.
Yeah.
I've got new ones waiting for beautiful things to be written. But yeah, I'm just looking at mine now, and lots of arrows and little squiggles and doodles and little notes to myself about books that I people have recommended and the podcasts that I need to listen to, and then stars and things. I actually bought a whole load of... So when you talk about performative, when ages ago when I was going to journal, I bought a whole load of coloured pens.
Yeah.
So I could make it beautiful, and I'd be using different colours to reflect different thoughts, and I put them all in this beautiful sparkly silver hot pencil case, just like I was a teenage girl.
Love it. I could so relate to this. Oh.
And I had pretty little stickers that I could, all of that. And I have if I can use them once, I've got this skanky black notebook that's just got all this random, it's got some post-it notes in it. It's all written in black pen. It's all got crossings out. But I have to say, when I read it back, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, this is cool. But I hadn't thought about this rewrite, sort of writing over my notes. So maybe I can do that in a different coloured pen.
Yeah, you could do, and maybe not try to align them to the emotions, because I know what would happen with me is like, damn it, that was meant to be green and I've done it red. It's ruined. So I think that I what I'm saying is ease up on yourself. This is the thing with commitments as well. Still, is that don't then over complicate it or however you want to describe it. Just let it be what it is.
Thank you, Bobby. I'm always helped by your wisdom. Interestingly, you pointed out that effectively we have announced some of our commitments to the world, whoever's listening. And so we now have effectively some accountability buddies.
We do.
Or lots of accountability buddies. And we are going to be talking a little bit more about that next week, to an extent, when we are going to have a topic on mentoring, aren't we?
Yeah,
so
support systems.
We're kind of rounding up to the end of this session on intentions, commitments, not New Year's resolutions, and all the time, whenever they need to be done. Anything else you want to add?
I have a little quote for us to end with.
Awesome.
Having listened to some of our previous listeners and saying that they like us finishing off with this, I'm trying to find things that hopefully will be pertinent. So here's the one for this episode. Commitment means staying loyal to what you said you were going to do long after the mood you said it in has left you. Commitment means staying loyal to what you said you were going to do long after the mood you said it in has left you. I like that.
Me too. Right then. Bye.
Bye. See you all soon.
Thank you so much for listening. Now, we'd love to hear about your commitments. As usual, all the resources from this episode are on our website and on the Spotify podcast page. Our commitment is to produce episodes that really address issues you're dealing with in your leadership life. So please do let us know about any topics you'd like us to talk about or share any questions you have. Next week, as it's National Mentoring Month, we will be discussing what it means to be a mentor and a mentee in being in and being a great support system. See you then.